Hi, I'm Graham Glynn, Assistant Provost and Executive Director for Teaching, Learning plus Technology at Stony Brook University, and this is Innovations in Education. In our show, we feature faculty and staff using innovative approaches and best practices in teaching and applications of educational technology that have had a positive effect on student learning. In this show, I'm joined by David Ferguson, Professor in the Tech and Society Department, who is also a recipient of the President and Chancellor's Award for Excellence in Teaching. We will be discussing making learning relevant to the real world and teaching the whole student. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Graham.
Tell me a little bit about the courses that you teach.
This semester I'm teaching two courses. One is an undergraduate course called Patterns of Problem Solving. It's actually an introduction to modeling and decision making. It's taken largely by students from social sciences, humanities, and the biological sciences. I also teach a graduate course on decision making. Those are the two courses that I'm teaching this semester.
And how many students? This is a traditional classroom with how many students?
In the undergraduate course I have 30 students, and in the graduate course I have 42 students.
Okay. Now I understand making a personal connection to students in your classroom is very important to you. How do you go about doing that?
So it's important to me not only that I make a connection to the students, but that the students make connections to each other. So I facilitate that initially and throughout the semester by group activities. I also have students respond to various kinds of questions, help each other to respond to various kinds of questions. This is a way of sort of getting students to be reflective and think about each other's responses.
Okay. And intimidation by math tends to be a very intimidating subject for students. How do you reduce that intimidation?
Well, it's interesting that you should raise that because many of the students that take this course have been very intimidated by mathematics. I'm talking about the undergraduate course. Many of the students have been very intimidated by mathematics. Many of them have the view that mathematics is not supposed to make sense. That is, that they're just to do assignments, hand in assignments, that's it.
Rote process.
Rote process, that is,
understand.
they're very much accustomed to sort of pattern match. I call it sort of pattern matching.
Right.
They're used to doing mathematics problems by flipping over to a particular page, seeing a problem that is done pretty much the way in which they're asked to do a problem, and they just sort of pattern match. They sort of do this sort of blind symbol manipulation.
Right.
To get them to sort of loosen up and realize that mathematical ideas are like ideas in other subjects. They exist at multiple levels, qualitative, quantitative, in that kind of way. And gradually they began to make sense of things, sort of making sense.
Okay. Now I understand you also like the students to challenge you with problems so that you can show them how the process works. Tell me a little bit about that.
So it's interesting to me because when I'm dealing with the typical problems in the course, of course I've thought about those problems many times before. So students often get the impression that when they throw a problem at me, that I should just be able to solve it in 5 seconds, because that's what they see in the class format. They're asking me questions that are very routine for me. So I challenge them to bring to me problems that are of interest to me, to help me solve those problems. And part of what I want them to see is how I have to struggle with the ideas and that it's a challenge for me. And they see me sweat because the problem is out of context. And I'm not exactly sure what this problem is asking for, and I'm certainly not sure of what technique might be used to solve the problem. So I think that's important for them to see, that when any of us are given tasks that are unfamiliar to us, there is that kind of struggling with the problem idea, and I want them to understand that.
Right. One of the challenges in higher education is not just to teach the students the content material, but how to think about the thought processes of an expert. So when you're going through these problems, are you vocalizing how you're thinking about the problem so they're getting a sense of how an expert approaches problems?
Not only do I vocalize my own problem solving, I encourage them to do that kind of thing also. That is, to try to have sort of way of thinking that when they're trying to solve something, they can reflect on where are they in the problem-solving process. You know, do they understand the problem? Do they understand what is being asked in this problem situation? So yes, I routinely do that. When I'm solving a problem, a student asks a question in class, I will say, well, okay, exactly what are you asking? Sometimes I will know what the student is asking, but I'm trying to get the student to articulate very clearly what he or she is asking. So what are you asking, et cetera? And then I think, well, this person has asked this particular question. Does anybody know an approach to solving this problem, for example? So yes, I'm constantly trying to let them see that this is not magical. There's not a magic in this, that we're just trying to struggle with a set of ideas and figure out what's going on.
Now, isn't this approach very disruptive to a pre-prepared class? I mean, if you come in with a set of things that you need to get through in the day, and a student asks you a very challenging problem that could take a long time to solve, isn't that a problem?
Well, I think one of the issues has to do with what do you value in the instructional process. And I place a very high value on understanding, of depth of understanding. So I view that nothing that I have prepared for a particular day is more important than getting a student to delve into an idea. And I think that one example that I may have relayed to you at one point is that I went into a calculus course, for example, and within 5 minutes into the class, I had a whole set of things prepared for that day. And 5 minutes into the class, a student raised a question. And when the student raised the question, I realized that I did not know the answer to the question. And I considered, in an instant, of course, how should I respond to this situation? So one thought that I had was that I would tell the student, I will think about this, and we will talk about it at the next class period. That was one thought that I had. Then another thought that I had was, what if we just try as a class to investigate this question? I don't know how far we will get, but perhaps we should just try to do that. And so I put aside all of the things that I had planned for that day, and I made sure that everybody understood the question that the student had raised. And then we tried to see whether or not we could resolve. Is this always true? And so people tried to give counterexamples, instances where it was not true. None of the counterexamples, quote counterexamples, turned out to be true counterexamples. We discovered that indeed it was true in all of those instances. And then we could discuss the idea that this is not a proof, because perhaps we just haven't come up with the right example to falsify this situation. And it turned out that we worked on that, and I mean weeks, in that the class of about, I think it was about 35 students or so. The class was very involved. Everybody was trying to see, does this make sense? Is this always true? It turned out 5 minutes before the class period was over, to my surprise, we resolved the issue. Indeed, this was a mini-theorem, and we had, in effect, proved a mini-theorem in mathematics. And students, many semesters after this situation, students would see me on campus and they would walk up to me and they would say, do you remember me? I was in that class. And the thing that they reminded me was they were in that class where we solved this mathematics, where we did this proof of some mathematical result. Seeing right before their eyes, here's how mathematics is done.